At age 65, the muscles from Brussels is finally breaking his silence. Jean-Claude Van Damme has spent decades fighting on screen, but his fiercest battles happened when the cameras stopped rolling. Today, we open the black file of martial arts history to reveal the 8 legendary icons who became Van Damme's bitterest rivals. From backstage brawls to stolen roles, these are the feuds that shook Hollywood. Who were the 8 men Van Damme calls his ultimate enemies? Let's find out. Steven Seagal, the Garden Party Brawl. To understand the hatred between Jean-Claude Van Damme and Steven Seagal, you must understand the hierarchy of the 1990s. While Van Damme was the athletic, high-kicking sensation, Steven Seagal was the stoic, wrist-breaking Aikido master. But behind the scenes, Seagal was a bully who refused to respect the Belgian star. For years, Seagal went on talk shows, including the Arsenio Hall show, openly mocking Van Damme's fighting ability, claiming it was just gymnastics and that Van Damme wouldn't last in a real street fight. Van Damme, young and fueled by pride, seethed at these insults. The tension finally exploded at a legendary house party hosted by Sylvester Stallone in Miami in 1997. It was a gathering of the Hollywood elite, but the air was thick with testosterone. Van Damme, tired of the years of disrespect, decided enough was enough. According to eyewitness accounts from Stallone himself, Van Damme approached Seagal in the middle of the party. He didn't want to talk, he wanted war. Van Damme explicitly challenged Seagal to go outside into the backyard to settle the argument of who was the tougher man once and for all. The entire party went silent. The guests waited for the clash of the titans. Van Damme stood in the garden, waiting, bouncing on his toes, ready to unleash his signature kicks, but Seagal never showed up. Instead of fighting, Seagal made excuses and quietly left the party, fleeing to a nightclub. Van Damme, like a relentless hunter, actually tracked him down to the second location and challenged him again. Once again, Seagal vanished. For Van Damme, this wasn't just a rivalry, it was proof that his enemy was a coward. To this day, Van Damme considers Seagal his greatest nemesis because the fight the world wanted to see never happened, leaving a permanent scar of unresolved aggression between them. Sylvester Stallone, the King versus the Prince.
It seems ironic that the man who hosted the party where Van Damme challenged Seagal is also on this list, but Sylvester Stallone is one of Van Damme's most complicated adversaries. This was not a feud born of hatred, but of intense professional jealousy and a struggle for the crown. When Van Damme arrived in Hollywood, Stallone was the undisputed king of action. Van Damme was the young, hungry prince coming to take the throne. Stallone initially took Van Damme under his wing, but the mentorship quickly turned sour as Van Damme's ego grew. The conflict stemmed from Van Damme's refusal to play by the rules Stallone had set. Stallone, a master of branding, viewed action movies as a business. Van Damme, fueled by youth and substance abuse issues at the time, viewed himself as a god. He began turning down roles that Stallone suggested, and even reportedly backed out of projects that Stallone had set up for them. The tension peaked during the casting of The Expendables. For years, Stallone tried to get Van Damme into the franchise. Van Damme famously rejected the offer for the first film, insulting Stallone by asking, "What is my character's motivation?" instead of just accepting the brotherhood. Stallone took this as a personal slight. He felt that Van Damme was ungrateful for the doors that had been opened for him. The press fueled this fire, constantly comparing Van Damme's physique to Stallone's Rambo. It became a cold war of box office numbers. While they eventually reconciled for The Expendables 2, the years between 1995 and 2010 were filled with icy silence and subtle jabs in the media. Van Damme viewed Stallone as the old guard trying to suppress him, while Stallone viewed Van Damme as a reckless talent throwing away his potential. It was a battle of alpha males, and in Hollywood, there is only room for one lion at the top of the mountain.
Arnold Schwarzenegger, the Predator. If Stallone was the mentor Van Damme rejected, Arnold Schwarzenegger was the mountain Van Damme tried and failed to climb. In the late 80s and early 90s, Arnold was the biggest movie star on planet Earth. Van Damme was obsessed with overtaking him. This created a one-sided feud that consumed Van Damme. He modeled this career after Arnold's, transitioning from silent brute to action hero. But Arnold treated Van Damme with a dismissal that infuriated the Belgian. The core of this enmity was the movie Predator. Most people forget that Van Damme was originally cast as the alien creature in the classic 1987 film. It was supposed to be his big break. However, the experience turned into a nightmare. Van Damme was put in a hot, heavy, red lobster-like suit that he hated. He couldn't do his kicks, he couldn't show his face. On set, he constantly complained to the producers, demanding to show his martial arts skills. Arnold, the star of the film, watched this behavior with amusement and disdain. Eventually, Van Damme was fired, or quit, depending on who you ask, and replaced. He blamed Arnold's influence for his removal, believing Arnold didn't want a smaller man stealing the spotlight with flashy moves. For the next decade, Van Damme tried to outdo Arnold. When Arnold did comedy, Twins, Van Damme tried comedy. When Arnold did sci-fi, Total Recall, Van Damme did Time Cop. It was a bitter rivalry of comparison. Van Damme openly bragged that his body was more aesthetic and athletic than Arnold's bulky bodybuilding frame. He considered Arnold a stiff fighter, while he was a real artist. Arnold, in return, famously quipped in interviews about Van Damme's height, refusing to acknowledge him as a serious threat to his box office dominance. To Van Damme, Arnold represented the Hollywood machine that valued size over skill, making him a philosophical enemy for life. Dolph Lundgren, The Universal Soldier War. On-screen, they were the perfect duo in Universal Soldier. Off-screen, Jean-Claude Van Damme and Dolph Lundgren were engaged in a dangerous psychological and physical war. The friction began the moment they met. Dolph was a 6'5" chemical engineer with a genius IQ and a background in Kyokushin karate. Van Damme was 5'9", on a good day, emotional and flashy. The height difference alone made Van Damme incredibly insecure. He wore lifts in his shoes and constantly tried to manipulate camera angles to look as tall as the Swedish giant. The most famous public display of this hostility occurred at the Cannes Film Festival in 1992. On the red carpet, in front of hundreds of flashing cameras, Van Damme and Dolph Lundgren got into a shoving match. They squared up, chests bumping, shouting in each other's faces as security rushed to separate them. For decades, fans debated, was it real or was it a publicity stunt? Van Damme has since hinted that while it was staged to promote the movie, the aggression behind it was 100% real. He needed to prove to the world and to Dolph that he wasn't afraid of the giant. But the real enmity happened on set. Reports from the Universal Soldier production describe a tense atmosphere where Van Damme would lock himself in his specialized trailer, $10,000 a week cost, while Dolph waited on set sweating in his heavy costume. Van Damme's lack of punctuality and his diva behavior drove the disciplined Dolph crazy. Dolph came from a respectful martial arts background. Van Damme was living the rock star lifestyle. They were polar opposites. Van Damme viewed Dolph as a threat to his physical dominance, someone who was stronger, taller, and more educated. He treated Dolph as an enemy to be neutralized rather than a co-star to be embraced, leading to decades of coldness before they finally found a mutual respect in their twilight years. Jackie Chan, The Clash of Philosophies. The feud between Jean-Claude Van Damme and Jackie Chan is a battle of East versus West, of rigid power versus fluid comedy. For years, fans dreamed of a crossover, but the two legends could not be more different. The enmity stems from a deep lack of respect for each other's fighting styles. Jackie Chan, the master of Chinese opera and acrobatic kung fu, viewed Van Damme's style as slow, stiff, and overly reliant on brute strength. Van Damme, trained in Shotokan karate and kickboxing, viewed Jackie's style as slapstick and not real fighting. The conflict escalated when Van Damme broke into the Hong Kong market. He was the Guilo, foreigner, trying to beat the Chinese masters at their own game. Jackie Chan was the unspoken king of Hong Kong cinema, and he was protective of his territory. Industry insiders whisper about a dinner where the two met. Van Damme, eager to prove himself, supposedly boasted about his speed. Jackie, ever the humble showman, made a joke about it. Van Damme took offense. He felt that the Eastern stars didn't respect his legitimate full-contact kickboxing record. Furthermore, there was the issue of Rush Hour 3. Rumors swirled that Van Damme was considered for a villain role or a similar project with Jackie, but the deal fell through because Van Damme refused to lose a fight on screen to Jackie. In Van Damme's mind, a real fighter like him could never be beaten by a performer like Jackie, even in a movie script. This arrogance insulted Jackie Chan, who put cinema above ego. To Van Damme, Jackie represented the one thing he couldn't conquer: the approval of the traditional Asian martial arts community. While they smile for photos now, the professional respect was non-existent during their prime, with Van Damme viewing Jackie as a clown and Jackie viewing Van Damme as a brute. Jet Li, the speed trap. If Jackie Chan was a stylistic annoyance, Jet Li was a genuine threat to Van Damme's legacy. When Jet Li arrived in Hollywood with Lethal Weapon 4, he brought a speed that the West had never seen. Suddenly, Van Damme's spinning helicopter kicks looked slow compared to Jet Li's wushu precision. Van Damme, who prided himself on being the most aesthetic kicker in the world, suddenly found himself looking like a dinosaur. The enmity solidified during the filming of The Expendables 2. Both men were finally in the same movie, and fans expected a showdown. However, the interaction was minimal. Why? Because Van Damme allegedly refused to be in scenes where he would look inferior to Jet Li. The size difference was massive. Van Damme towered over the diminutive Jet Li, but Jet Li's reputation for speed intimidated Van Damme. Van Damme is a perfectionist regarding his image. He edits his own fight scenes in his head. He knew that if he fought Jet Li, the camera would have to speed him up or slow Jet Li down to make it look even. The enemy here wasn't just Jet Li the person, but what Jet Li represented, the evolution of martial arts cinema that was leaving Van Damme behind. There are also unconfirmed reports from the 90s of a proposed project pitting the two against each other that Van Damme killed because he demanded huge sums of money, effectively sabotaging the film because he knew that sharing the screen with the wushu prodigy would expose his own limitations. Jet Li's humility and silence only infuriated the loud, boisterous Van Damme more. To Van Damme, Jet Li represented the one thing he couldn't conquer: the approval of the traditional Asian martial arts community. Chuck Norris, the American Wall. Before Van Damme could become the hero, he had to get past the gatekeeper, Chuck Norris. In the early 80s, Van Damme was a nobody. He was literally a bouncer at a bar owned by Chuck Norris. He was a stuntman on Norris's classic film Missing in Action. The relationship started as master and student, or rather, employer and employee, but this dynamic bred a deep, simmering resentment in the young Belgian. Chuck Norris was the establishment. He was the all-American, conservative, stoic karate champion. Van Damme was the European, flashy, flexible, and controversial upstart. As Van Damme's fame skyrocketed with Bloodsport, he began to publicly distance himself from Norris. He didn't want to be known as Chuck Stuntman anymore. He started making comments in the press about how the old style of karate, standing still and punching, was boring, a direct shot at Norris's Tang Soo Do background. The enmity here was political and personal. Norris represented the disciplined, clean image of martial arts. Van Damme represented the chaotic, sexy, dangerous new wave. Van Damme felt that Norris never gave him the respect he deserved when he was a nobody. He felt looked down upon. When Van Damme became huge, he made it a point to be everything Chuck Norris wasn't. While Norris was filming TV shows like Walker, Texas Ranger, Van Damme was mocking TV actors and claiming he was a true movie star. It was an Oedipal struggle, the son trying to kill the father figure to establish his own dominance. Van Damme lists Norris as his rival because Norris was the standard he had to destroy to build his own legend. Bolo Yeung, the Eternal Shadow. Finally, we reach the most iconic enemy of all, Bolo Yeung. This entry is different. This isn't about hatred. It's about a rivalry that defined existence. In Bloodsport and Double Impact, Bolo was the monster Van Damme had to slay. But why is he on this list of enemies? Because for a large part of Van Damme's life, Van Damme couldn't escape Bolo's shadow. Everywhere Van Damme went, people asked him, "Is Chong Li real? Is Bolo really stronger than you?" It drove Van Damme crazy. He was the hero, the star, the pretty face. Yet the audience loved the beast. Bolo Yeung, with his massive chest and silent charisma, stole scenes from Van Damme without saying a word. On set, the tension was palpable. In the final fight of Bloodsport, the hits were hard, they were heavy. Van Damme had to be at his absolute physical peak because he knew Bolo, a former Mr. Hong Kong powerlifter, could physically snap him in half if a stunt went wrong. Bolo represented the physical limit Van Damme pushed himself against. There were days on set where Van Damme, exhausted and dehydrated, would look across the ring at the stoic Bolo and feel a genuine sense of intimidation. That fear fueled his performance, but it also created a lingering psychological rivalry. Even years later, Van Damme admitted that standing opposite Bolo Yeung gave him a feeling of danger he never felt with anyone else. Bolo was the ultimate measuring stick. Van Damme includes him as his greatest enemy not out of malice, but out of the sheer magnitude of the challenge he presented. Bolo forced Van Damme to become the legend he is today. Without the beast, there would be no beauty.
So, you have heard the stories of the 8 men. You have seen the brawls, the insults, and the Cold Wars. But do you know why Jean-Claude Van Damme had such intense feuds with every single A-list legend of his time? The truth is, the biggest enemy was never Seagal, or Stallone, or Arnold. The biggest enemy was Jean-Claude Van Damme himself. During the 1990s, Van Damme was suffering from undiagnosed rapid cycling bipolar disorder. He was navigating the highest peaks of Hollywood fame while battling a severe addiction to cocaine, reportedly spending $10,000 a week on the drug at his lowest point. This chemical imbalance created a God complex. He was paranoid, believing everyone was out to steal his spotlight. He was arrogant, believing he was the only real fighter in a town of fakes. He picked fights with Seagal and mocked Stallone, not because they were bad men, but because Van Damme was fighting a war inside his own head. He projected his insecurities onto these 8 titans. He saw judgment in Chuck Norris's eyes. He saw threat in Jet Li's speed. And he saw mockery in Seagal's silence. Today, at age 65, Van Damme reveals these enemies not to reignite the fire, but to admit that for 30 years, he was a man burning down the world because he didn't know how to put out the fire within himself. We have traveled through the golden age of action cinema to uncover the truth behind the muscles and the splits. From the garden party brawls with Steven Seagal to the box office wars with Arnold Schwarzenegger, Jean-Claude Van Damme's life has been a movie more dramatic than any script he ever filmed. These 8 enemies defined a generation of martial arts. Now, the question is passed to you. Who do you think was Van Damme's true superior? Was Seagal actually afraid, or was he just smart to walk away? Could Van Damme really have beaten a prime Dolph Lundgren? And in the Battle of the Legends, whose side are you on? This is the Black File, and the file is now open for your judgment. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the hidden history of Hollywood's toughest men, you know what to do. Smash that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a revelation. Drop a comment below. If Van Damme and Steven Seagal fought in that garden in 1997, who would have walked out alive? Let the debate begin in the comments section. Thanks for watching, and stay disciplined.